People love simple stories. A bad woman, a good man, two innocent kids caught in the middle. That's the version he probably tells now. The version that makes people pat his back and say, "You survived." But life didn't feel simple when it was actually happening. Life felt like drowning slowly in a house full of people who expected you to keep smiling. My name is Piper. I was a wife before I was old enough to truly know what that meant. I was a mother to two boys before I ever got to be a woman to myself. And while everyone talks about how Jasper struggled, no one ever seems to ask how it feels to raise children alone while still being married. He was there physically sometimes, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually, he was gone. Morning coffee, laptop open, phone buzzing. Dinner conversations cut short for conference calls. Weekends with one eye on a screen. And I kept telling myself, this is what a good wife does. She supports. She sacrifices. She waits. But no one ever said how lonely waiting feels. By the time I was 22, I felt 40. I stopped being Piper. I became mom. Wife. Background noise in my own home. And he didn't even notice. That's when I met Marcus. I'm not romanticizing it. I'm not pretending it was a fairy tale. It was wrong. But it was the first time in years that someone looked at me like I mattered. He asked if I was okay. He noticed when I was tired. He touched my hand like it meant something. I didn't go looking for an affair. I went looking for air. And suddenly, I could breathe again. When Jasper found out, he didn't ask why I was breaking. He only cared that I had. His words weren't hurt. They were cruel. As if years of neglect were invisible and only my mistake was real. So yes, the marriage ended. But not because I was the only one who failed. It ended because I was the only one who admitted we were already broken. After the divorce, reality hit me in the face. 2 children. 1 income. No safety net. And when Marcus disappeared too, the shame almost swallowed me whole. But I didn't collapse. I stepped up. I worked. I cooked. I stayed awake through fevers and nightmares and bills I couldn't pay. Then came Derek. And later, Calvin. Not perfect men, but men who at least tried to stand in a life Jasper abandoned. And suddenly I had 5 children in one home. Not half-siblings. Not stepkids. Just kids who needed love in a world that kept walking away from them. I wasn't building chaos. I was building a family out of fragments. And then Jasper came back into the picture like a hero. Theme parks. Gifts. Trips. He became the fun parent. But only to his 2. Every time Braden and Parker walked out that door with him, I watched 3 other children stare at the floor and pretend they didn't care. Landon's eyes confused. Skylar's lip trembling. Amelia clutching her toy, like she'd disappear without it. Do people understand what that does to a kid's brain? To see their brothers worth more than them in real time? Maybe Jasper thought, they're not mine. But to them, they were just the forgotten ones. And I was done watching children in my home believe they were less than. All I ever asked was, just include them sometimes. Just be kind. Just be bigger than biology. But he chose borders. He chose separation. He chose to draw lines through living, breathing hearts. And when I pushed back, he called it manipulation. Like I was some strategist sitting in the dark, planning emotional chess moves with my children's hearts. But the truth is much uglier and much simpler. I was panicking. I was watching my family split into worthy and left behind, right in front of my eyes, and I was the only one who seemed to care that it was happening. When Jasper planned that resort weekend for Parker's birthday, I didn't originally mean to make it a problem. I just asked carefully as a mother who was trying to save face for her children. Maybe Landon could come too? His birthday is close, and we can't really afford anything special for him this year. Even saying it out loud made me feel small. Like I was begging a man who used to sleep beside me for basic decency. His answer was flat. No. I'm taking my sons. No hesitation. No empathy. No thought for how his words would echo through a house full of kids who heard everything. That my sons sliced deeper than any insult ever had. Because it confirmed what I feared most. He didn't see a family. He saw a hierarchy. So I did the only thing I could think of in that moment. I told Braden and Parker they couldn't go. Not to punish them. Not to hurt Jasper. But because in my house, we moved as one unit. And no child was going to feel smaller than another. They cried. Of course they did. But sometimes parenting means making decisions that hurt in the moment to stop a deeper wound later. What I didn't expect was Jasper to show up anyway. To stand outside and whisper to them without me. To undermine me in front of them like I had no authority in my own home. When they came back with bags full of souvenirs, I felt my chest actually hurt. Not jealousy. Not bitterness. But humiliation. 3 kids sat watching, trying to act normal while their eyes filled up. Skylar asked if maybe she wasn't good enough to go places like that. Landon didn't say anything at all. He just went quiet, and when a child goes quiet, that's when the real damage starts. And that night, something in me snapped. If Jasper was going to paint me as irrational, emotional, unstable, then I was going to make sure people knew what his boundaries really looked like to 5 children sharing one home. When he came to pick them up the following weekend, I didn't plan a speech. But when I saw him standing there, calm, detached, unaffected by the chaos he created, the words spilled out. Real men don't pick and choose which kids deserve to feel loved. I wasn't talking only about him. I was talking about every man who ever walked in and out of a child's life without acknowledging the mess they left behind. Calvin was there. The boys were there. The truth was there. And I wanted Jasper to feel it for once. I wanted him to feel how it feels to be judged by the people who need you most. He stood there silent, like a statue. No apology. No softness. Just a man wrapped in his own sense of righteousness. And in that moment, I no longer saw my ex-husband. I saw my enemy. After that day, the silence between us turned into something else. He stopped speaking like a human and started communicating like a lawyer. Everything moved to that cold co-parenting app. Every message carefully typed. Emotion removed. Human connection erased. I didn't want cold efficiency. I wanted him to remember that we once made children together. That these weren't just cases or schedules. These were human beings who belonged to both of us in some way. So yes, I tried a different approach. I let Braden call him. I let him tell Jasper how quiet Landon had gotten. How Skylar cried on her birthday. How the house didn't feel the same without them. People will call that coaching. But what was I supposed to do? Lie to protect him? Pretend he wasn't leaving emotional wreckage behind him? I wasn't manipulating my children. I was letting them speak. And hoping maybe, just maybe, their voices would reach him in a way mine couldn't anymore. But he stayed unmoved. And that's when I started to realize something terrifying. He didn't just not care about them. He didn't care about me either, not even as the mother of his children. And if he didn't care at all, then I needed to think about protecting my family from the consequences of his detachment. I needed to start documenting. Not out of revenge, but out of fear. Because when a man stops seeing you as human, you start preparing for war. When people hear the word documentation, they imagine something cold and calculated. Like I sat down with an evil plan and a checklist labeled, how to destroy him. But nothing felt strategic inside me. It felt desperate. I was a mother standing in the middle of a house full of children, trying to hold walls together with my bare hands while everyone else argued about who owned what. So, yes, I started saving messages. Not to trap him, but because I was scared of how easily he erased me, professionally, emotionally, legally. The tone he started using on that app wasn't the man I married. It was controlled, distant, sharp with legal language. Stick to the court order. I am not responsible for non-biological children. Your financial situation is not my concern. Each word felt like a tiny slap. Every time I imagined a judge one day asking me, "Why didn't you do something when you saw this happening?" And I refused to be the woman who had no answer. So I wrote things down. Not lies. Moments. What the kids said. When they cried. When they asked questions I couldn't answer. I took photos of Landon staring out the window when his brothers left. I screenshotted messages where Jasper acted like my difficulties didn't exist. I wrote notes late at night just to release the thoughts that wouldn't let me sleep. You can call it weaponizing feelings. I call it evidence of reality. Then Calvin lost his job, and everything shifted from struggle to panic. Bills started piling up like silent threats. The kids felt it immediately. The way I stood longer in grocery aisles calculating prices. The way I turned off lights aggressively. The way I avoided their eyes when they asked for things I couldn't afford. This was the moment any co-parent with a heart would say, "Let me help for a little while." I didn't ask Jasper to pay for the others. I asked for flexibility. Extra time with the boys. Some grace. A little humanity. But his response was colder than even before. "This is not my responsibility. My obligation is clearly defined." Obligation, like fatherhood, was a minimum payment on a credit card. That was when I stopped trying to explain and started preparing to protect. If our home was considered unstable, then I would have to prove that his presence was the disruption. Not our lives. Not our love. Him. People don't understand what it's like to live in constant fear of losing your children. It's not dramatic. It's not cinematic. It's quiet suffering that sits right behind your eyes. Every police siren makes you freeze. Every knock at the door makes your heart race. Every unfamiliar car makes you imagine the worst. So when a lawyer friend suggested I at least explore my options to protect full custody if the environment became too stressful for the boys, I listened. I didn't think of it as an attack. I thought of it as an insurance policy. If Jasper's coldness continued, if he continued creating emotional distance, then I would make sure my children were safe from that future. I believed, deep down, that the boys belonged with their brothers and sisters, with me, in a unified home. And if I had to fight for that, then so be it. When the papers were finally filed, my hands were shaking too badly to hold the pen steady. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't smiling. I was mourning. Mourning the man I thought I once knew. Mourning the family I imagined we'd always share. Mourning the fact that love had turned into something that required legal signatures. But I signed. Because fear makes you brave in the most twisted ways. And when the court gave me temporary primary custody, I thought the war was over. I thought I had won safety, stability, control. What I didn't realize was that I had just walked my children into an entirely new kind of pain. The night Braden and Parker packed their bags to leave Jasper's house, they didn't cheer. They didn't run. They didn't even hug him. They just looked lost. Confused, like no choice felt right. And a small, horrible voice in my mind whispered for the first time, "What if I didn't save them? What if I just moved the pain?" But I crushed that voice immediately. Because doubt is the enemy of determination. And I had already crossed the line. I thought the hardest part would be getting them back. I thought once the boys were home again, back under my roof, surrounded by their siblings, everything would make sense. That the chaos would settle, the anxiety would dissolve, and our house would finally feel whole again. But something was different. Braden and Parker didn't relax. They didn't take off their shoes and run to their rooms the way they used to. They didn't joke with Landon or argue with Skylar over the TV. They didn't even ask me what was for dinner. They just observed, watched me, like they were studying a stranger. At night I'd hear them whispering in their room, replaying memories of their father's house. Not with anger, not with betrayal, but with a quiet kind of grief that made my chest physically ache. It was the first time I realized I hadn't united a family. I had uprooted one. I tried to fill the house with warmth. Extra hugs. Movie nights. Games at the table. Constant reassurance. But it felt forced. Artificial. Like I was acting in front of my own children. And children feel that. They always do. Braden started getting stomachaches before school. Parker wet the bed again for the first time in years. Landon became even quieter, like he was trying to disappear. Skylar asked if her biological dad didn't love her because she cried too much. Every child in this house was carrying a different version of the same question. Why isn't love enough to make this feel right? Then came the phone call. The school counselor, Ms. Walker, were concerned about Braden's mental state and Parker's emotional withdrawal. There have been multiple panic episodes and disrupted focus. We'd like to speak with you about additional support.
Concern.
Support. But all I heard was threat. Because deep down, I knew what support could become. Investigation. Evaluation. Removal. The very thing I had sworn to prevent. We sat in a tiny office with colorful posters about emotions that made me feel sick. She was kind, gentle, the type of woman people trusted. She asked questions about home, about routines, about interactions, about their father. And when she asked Braden softly how he felt about living with me full-time instead of his dad, he hesitated. That hesitation shattered me. Because this was supposed to be simple. He was supposed to say, "I want to be with my mom and siblings." Instead, he whispered, "I just want everyone to stop fighting about me." The counselor looked at me differently after that. Not accusing, but reevaluating. That night I stayed awake in my bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment. The court signing, the tears, the silence. And for the first time since this all began, I wondered, was I protecting them, or was I trying to win something I lost a long time ago? But that thought terrified me more than Jasper ever had. Because if I was wrong, then all of this had been for nothing. And I had broken them for my own sense of righteousness. Around the same time, Calvin started pulling away again, staying out longer, answering less, existing in the house like a shadow instead of a partner. We didn't fight. We just stopped talking. And a cold realization crawled up my spine. Jasper had been right. Not about the kids,
But about me.
I was always trying to build something on unstable ground and calling it love. And now the ground was finally giving out beneath me. Then the message came. From Jasper's mother. She wanted to meet. Just us. No kids. No lawyers. And suddenly the fear returned. The same fear I felt the day everything started. Because when a woman who once defended you wants to meet in silence, it's never for comfort. She chose a small cafe across town. Not close to either of our homes. Not somewhere with history. Just a neutral, quiet place where the truth wouldn't echo too loudly. When I walked in and saw Jasper's mother already seated, hands folded around a mug she wasn't even drinking, I felt like a child again. Not someone who once shared a family with her. Not someone who raised her grandsons. Just a girl about to be told where she went wrong. She didn't smile. She didn't hug me. She didn't accuse me either. "Sit down, Piper," she said softly. "We need to talk." The words, "we need to talk," felt heavier than any court document. "I believed you for a long time," she began. About him. About the chaos. About the children. I looked down at the table because I didn't know how to defend myself against honesty. "But I started seeing the boys," she continued. "Not the version shown to the judge. The real version. Quiet. Fearful. Fractured." My throat tightened. "And recently, Braden asked me something that I cannot ignore." She swallowed hard before repeating it. He asked, "Why does Mom need us to be broken so she can feel like she's right?" It felt like being struck. My own child, describing me as someone who needed his pain? "No, that's not." I started, but she lifted her hand. "I'm not here to argue with you, Piper," she said gently. "I'm here to tell you the truth." She leaned forward. "You weren't protecting them from Jasper. You were protecting your version of the story." Each word slid into me like icy water. "Maybe you didn't mean to hurt them. I can see that. But intention does not erase damage." There was no anger in her voice. Only grief. "You may not have started the fire, but you kept feeding it long after you should have walked away." I left that meeting shaken. Not furious. Not defensive. Just cracked. For the first time, I didn't feel like a warrior mother. I felt like a woman who had lost a battle she pretended was a victory. And when I came home, the house felt different. The silence wasn't hostile anymore. It was honest. Calvin wasn't there. A note sat on the kitchen counter. "I don't know how to be part of this life anymore. I'm sorry." I stood in the kitchen holding that piece of paper, looking at 5 bedrooms filled with children who did not ask for any of this, and I realized I had built my entire sense of self on chaos. On needing to be right. on needing a villain to justify the wounds I never healed. And now, without that villain, I didn't know who I was. Then the notice arrived. Custody reevaluation requested. Based on psychological concerns, emotional instability, testimony from educators, testimony from family, changed circumstances. They didn't frame it as punishment. They framed it as best interest of the children. That phrase, the one I had once clung to as my shield, now pierced through every defense I had left. Because a part of me, the smallest, most buried part, finally began to wonder, what if Jasper wasn't trying to hurt them at all? What if he was simply trying not to drown the way I had? But there was no time for reflection. Court moved fast when emotions were involved. Annotations, evaluations, interviews with the boys, reports on my household, pieces of my life, and my choices laid out like a puzzle I didn't recognize anymore. And for the first time since the beginning, I wasn't in control of the narrative. I used to think losing control meant the world was ending. But the truth is far more humiliating than that. Losing control didn't feel dramatic. It felt quiet, clinical, methodical. People with clipboards started walking through my life like I was no longer the main character in it. Social workers, psychologists, court-appointed specialists. They weren't cruel. They were calm. And somehow that was worse. They watched how my children moved around me, how they hesitated before answering questions, how they checked my expression before saying anything too honest. I had built my world on emotion, and now it was being measured by people who didn't care about my feelings at all. Only the children's. Only the truth. The final hearing didn't feel like a battle. It felt like an autopsy of my choices. Everything I had once considered strength was reframed as instability. My passion, emotional volatility. My protectiveness, control. My insistence on unity, forced dependence. My documentation, fixation. Even my tears didn't work anymore. Not because they weren't real, but because the court no longer trusted that they meant what I claimed they meant. When Braden spoke privately to the judge, I couldn't hear his words. But I saw his eyes when he came back into the room. There was no anger there, only relief. And that should have hurt me more than any accusation. When the decision was finally read, I felt strangely calm. Primary custody returned to Jasper. Supervised, structured visitation granted to me. Mandatory therapy required. Those words echoed like a verdict on my entire identity. For years, the only thing I was sure of was, I am their mother. I am the constant. I am the safe place. Now, even that certainty was gone. And the scariest part? A part of me understood why. When Jasper walked in to collect the boys, I couldn't bring myself to look at him. Shame is heavier than anger. He didn't look victorious. He looked exhausted, like a man who had finally escaped a long tunnel but was too tired to celebrate the light. He knelt and hugged them. Not desperately, not possessively, just lovingly. And when he stood again, our eyes met for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. There was no hatred there, no smugness, no lecture waiting behind his lips. Just one quiet sentence. I hope one day you heal too. And then he walked away. No revenge, no punishment, just absence. And I realized that was exactly what hurt most. The house felt enormous without the boys. Not peaceful, just empty. The younger ones moved through it like ghosts, unsure of where they belonged now. I sat on the couch for hours staring at nothing, replaying years of memory in reverse. The wedding, the long nights, the affair, the fighting, the obsession with being right. And finally, the question I had spent years avoiding. Did I destroy my own family in the name of protecting it? There was no answer. Only silence. Only echo. Only me. People soon stopped checking in. Drama makes audiences. Healing doesn't. Without chaos, I wasn't interesting anymore. Just a woman left with the consequences of her own voice. And maybe, for the first time in my adult life, that was exactly what I needed.
To sit with the truth.
Without a villain. Without a hero. Without an audience. Just me. And the quiet understanding that love without control is the only love that was ever real.